You're listening to Car Seat Questions, a podcast for parents of curious kids. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Eddie. And if you're anything like us, you either have a kid or you care for a kid with questions. Questions about all sorts of things.
So, for the next half hour, hop into the passenger seat, buckle your belt, and become childlike with us as the Lord takes us where He wants us to go.
Enjoy the show. Car Seat Questions, Season 2, Courtney Wilson.
Great.
Nailed it.
Welcome to this week's episode of Car Seat Questions. We are here with Courtney Wilson. Hi, Courtney.
Hello.
Can you tell us a little about who you are, what you do in your family?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Courtney Wilson. I'm the KidsWorld Pastor at Christ Community Church, which is way out in the
end of the line. Yeah.
Yeah, the metric comes out towards us, so I guess I get to call it that. But I'm the children's pastor at our St. Charles South Elgin campus. I've been here for 11 years, but I'm also a mom. I have 4 kids. I have a 22-year-old, a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 13-year-old. So 3 boys and then a girl. So.
Did you ever have them like as a children's pastor? Were you their children's pastor?
Oh, yeah. I was their children's pastor. Like all of them have commented on that. Like our mom's been our children's pastor too. And it's always been like kind of, it's a moment when I hand them off into middle school. Like it's a moment.
You were just telling us before we started recording a story about our son because he is under your care as a children's pastor at our church. And, you know, as parents, we just want to hear the story again. So can you tell us the story about our child again?
Absolutely. Yeah. I walked in the nursery this last Sunday and Trey was sitting on a volunteer's lap in the nursery. And as I walked by, he's like, "Mommy," like pops up. And I think just because I was like adult walking past the window kind of about time. And someone had told him exactly what time you should be coming back. So he was like watching the clock and he had it down. He knew exactly what time the big hand needed to be on, like what number, which is pretty brilliant for his age. And I went in and sat down with him and I looked to see like what exact time the service was going to get out. And he saw my phone and he grabs my phone and starts like, goes straight to the photos and starts scanning through photos and like choosing photos that he wanted to see of like my cats and my dog and asking me who people were in pictures. So we sat there and figured out for a little while. And eventually he wanted to read a book and he kind of got stuck over my daughter who volunteers in that room and hung out with her, read books with her for a while. So.
Yes. If there's anything that Trey loves, it's a timer or a clock to know what's happening and looking at pictures, mostly of himself.
Yeah, he's kind of full of himself.
Yeah. That's okay. He's 3. So yeah, we'll give him another couple of years and then he has to get over that. But so today we want to talk with you about kind of like just all things children's pastor.
Ken?
What kind of questions do you get? How do you shepherd your tiny flock of sheep at your church and parents? Because they're such a huge part of your ministry and your work. It's not just to children, but also to their parents. So what's a question you've gotten in the last month from a kid at church?
Yeah. Oh, I got lots of questions about dinosaurs, which are like a whole episode. So I don't even know if I should get into the dinosaur.
Let's hear it.
I do get the dinosaur question a lot. This last week, the question that I got from a kid, which is always like, as a children's pastor, is one of those like crushers, is they're like, why do we have to go to church?
Oh, yeah.
That was a good one. Lots of questions about how do we listen to God, talk to God. Lots of questions, honestly, that you guys have answered on some of the episodes. Questions about heaven, questions about, you know, why are there bad things? Who's the devil? A lot of those kinds of things, yeah.
And what would your answer be to someone who asks, why do we have to go to church?
Ooh, so the why we have to go to church is usually with kids, it's hard. It's easier to answer with parents, quite honestly, because with parents, it's like, well, there are 3 or more non-parent adults in your child's life are going to make your child more successful in life. And this is a great place to find those people. So that's kind of my like blanket answer for parents.
Yeah.
For kids, it is a little harder sometimes because, you know, they don't always see the benefit in like the community of faith around them until they're at a certain age and they're looking back and seeing that. And so when a kid asks me, it's usually Like, well, this is fun. And this is when we learn more about Jesus, and where, your parents get to go learn more about Jesus and you get to learn more about Jesus. And so we go home and our families should be closer to Jesus because of that. So, depending on the age, obviously that answer adjusts a little bit, but it's fun when you have like 4th and 5th graders. We just did baptisms, and we have lots of 4th and 5th graders that I get to meet one-on-one, and to answer that question for them, to say, when you stand in that tank to be baptized, there are people watching you who have changed your diapers and who have answered all of your why questions and have prayed with you and are a part of that decision that you've made. And so this is exciting that you have been a part of a church and you're declaring your place in the church at this moment. So I think it's easier to answer once they're at that age and they can look back and reflect a little bit. When they're little, it's like, we have really cool toys and we're going to learn about Jesus and sing songs and, do all of those things.
Is there like a specific, like maybe age group or range that you find more interesting, right? And maybe the way they ask questions or how they ask the questions?
Yeah, they ask in such different ways. Like, I love to wonder with preschoolers, like when kids are in preschool, that wonder dial is like just cranked up so high. And it's so fun to just ask all the I wonder questions and know that their imaginations are wild and they can picture those things. They can put themselves in the situation. They can see where that Bible story or where those things that you're talking about really, like, they can wonder about all of those things. So I love wondering with preschoolers, but I also love like that concrete nature of like, as you get into elementary and they have those really concrete thoughts. I love as they get 4th and 5th grade and you can kind of wonder in a different way where you can start talking about symbolism and some of those things. I don't know that I would say there's a favorite age necessarily. I think it's just being able to interact with all of those ages is exciting and important.
Yeah. So a question we got was, how and when do you talk about the crucifixion with a child? And I think we can even go into other harder topics that are in scripture too, that are maybe more graphic or even more just weighty. And how do you know how far to get into that with your children at different ages?
Yeah, I think those questions as parents can kind of like unnerve us a little bit. Like, I don't want to answer this wrong. I don't want to get this wrong. And I think the big thing is to remember, like, when they ask those questions, like, stop, take a deep breath. Know that it's always okay to tell your kids, like, I'll get back to you, and ask your children's pastor or ask someone for some input and how they'd answer those things. But I think in questions like this, some of the gore of the Bible, or specifically with the crucifixion, I think it is approaching it so that you're carefully getting to that place, knowing that there is no reason to really rush into that, right? Like, there's no reason to tell your 3-year-old the gore of the crucifixion. It's just not even appropriate. So knowing that will come. I think sometimes parents are passionate about it, but you don't, you don't run in even and tell your child everything. Like, you don't hold them in your arms the first time you have them and you're like, hey, let me tell you everything about me. But I'm going to reveal this over time. Your kids are going to get to know you, right? So they love you in that moment and you love them. And then you're going to continue to learn about each other and love each other in a more like dear and near way. And so when we think about that in terms of faith, we're looking at, when they're young, telling them the things that are going to help them learn to love and trust Jesus. That's the information that they need to know to build and gain that trust relationship. And then as they get older, I mean, we awe and wonder at the pain and the gore of the crucifixion, because we think, man, that was huge love that Jesus showed us on the cross. Because of that, that's appropriate for, once you're up in those kind of middle school, high school, maybe the upper elementary ages even. But they're not going to wonder at it when they're younger. They're going to think like, that doesn't make sense. Like, that doesn't, I don't understand that. So to take it really slow and to say, You can say, you know, he died on a cross, he died on a cross, he died a painful death on a cross. You know, it can kind of build as they get older. But to be able to take those stories and to know that that's okay, that that's what a developing faith looks like.
Yeah. Because I think, like, for adults knowing what it was actually like, it's important to know that, like, yeah, he bore our sin in a painful, excruciating death, a death that was, that was reserved for, like, the worst of criminals in that time. But for a child, that doesn't mean anything to them. And so to know that it's there and it's important for an adult Christian, but it's not necessarily important for a younger child to know that. And I think when we talked about in our episode of suffering, we talked about knowing the sensitivity of your child. Like, our son is quite sensitive to hard and big things and to pain. And so knowing and watching your own child to be like, how much can they handle? What is their capacity to absorb this emotion of someone else or the pain of someone else at different stages?
Yeah, and I even think for adults, even that kind of like gory reality might be something hard for us to kind of understand.
Yeah, picture.
How do you start talking about Jesus or God and the Bible at home? And what would you say to a parent who kind of wants to just leave it up to the church?
I'd say, please talk about it at home. Please don't just leave it to the church. You have so many more hours than we have. I liken it to if a parent told me, like, hey, so once a week I take my kids to an all-you-can-eat buffet and I feed them. And then, we might do snacks on Wednesday, but like, then that's just what they eat for the week. Like, you wouldn't do that to your kids. You wouldn't, like, people would be like, that's crazy. So if faith is important to you, then you wouldn't do that with faith. Like, you would continually find ways that you're feeding them, integrating that throughout the week. So I think just talking about it at home, I think some families are intimidated a little bit because a lot of parents weren't raised that way. Like I wasn't raised that way. I was never taught. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I didn't come by this because, my parents showed me how to do this. In fact, I remember when we took my oldest son, we were bringing him to the church to be dedicated. I was the children's pastor at the church, and I was in tears as I was going to the church. So I thought, I don't know how to do this. I have a degree in children's ministry, and I'm about to make a vow in front of God and a group of people to point this kid towards Jesus and to hope that someday he'll make a decision to follow Jesus. And I'm not sure I know how to do it. And I remember my husband like reaching over in the car and being like, we're going to figure it out. Like, it's going to be okay. And you do know more than you think you know. So I think for parents to have that confidence that like, you do know more than you think you know. But always, like, there's kind of a little hierarchy when you're teaching kids about God. It's like, if you know the Bible, then you know the theology, which is, who God is. And then you help kids learn their identity because they're made in the image of God. Their identity will inform their beliefs, and their beliefs will inform their behavior. And so if you continually are teaching your children who God is and what God has done, and parents, like, this. Like, this. If you're following Jesus, you know who God is and what he's done. And so to attribute those things to him just throughout the day, in your daily life, in your conversations, to pray, to open your Bibles in front of your kids, to talk to them about things, is simple and just can become rhythmic without becoming prescribed. Like, we have to sit down and do this 30-minute Bible study. But instead, just kind of taking those times throughout the day to continually point your children to God so that they see who he is, and then relating that then to things that you see in them. Those are really easy ways to start teaching your kids about who God is and to make it appealing to follow Jesus. Because, they can make a decision for Christ because they feel like it's the right thing to do. But I want kids to make a decision for Christ because they are so drawn to him that it's irresistible.
If you had maybe one takeaway for every maybe age-ish group that you're like, if you came to church today, this is what I want each group to take away today. And every Sunday I want you to take away this one thing. What would that be for each group?
Oh, I think the overall, like, there's an overall, right, of like, you are known and loved by God. And if every kid walked out of our ministry saying like, I'm known and loved by God who created me, like that, I would be fully satisfied knowing that they know those are two things that they know about them. But as we kind of develop in our own, like with our littles, we want them to know like God knows your name. You are loved. Our nursery volunteers, we want them to use the kids' names and talk about how they are loved by God, how much they are loved, how they're known, and that they are important to us, and that they learn those trust relationships so that they learn that you can trust us and you can trust God. And overall, there's a bigger piece to this. I think with preschoolers, again, I want them to know that they are known and loved by God. But I also want them to know the wonder of who God is and how there is this wonderful God that has created you and that knows you and loves you, and that they want to explore, that their eyes would light up at who God is and what he has done. And then with our elementary kids, I would want them to start really being able to explore who God is, to really wonder about God, to know that they are, when they put their faith in Jesus, that they're led by the Holy Spirit. That's something that I don't think we talk about enough in children's ministries, is that like the Holy Spirit is a real thing that lives inside of you when you put your faith and trust in him. And so I think knowing the triune God, the God who, sees them, knows them, loves them, and leads them, is something that we talk a lot about with our elementary age kids. So I think if I were to break it down kind of per age group, I mean, I know those kind of build on each other there, and really the overarching is that they're known and loved. Those are the things I want them to know.
So how would you encourage parents to be honest when they like don't know, right, the answer to a question, or they don't know how to speak into, something that maybe a child has asked them, or maybe a child is experiencing, like how can we make that like normal to be like, hey, like I don't really know the answer right now, but I can find out and actually follow through with that, right? Because it's kind of easy to be like, yeah, I'll find out, and, just never do it. But like how, like, like what would you be encouragement for parents?
Yeah, I would say, again, just to stop in those moments and be able to, first of all, appreciate that your child is having these questions. Like it is okay to stop and to take a breath. And it is okay to not feel like it's a reflection on you, no matter what the question is. Sometimes I think as parents, we're like, ooh, I haven't taught them that, or I should have known that, or anything. It's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on you that your child is actually wondering about these things. And that's a good reflection. I hope you see that. I hope you're excited about that and there's joy in that. And I think there's that moment where you say, you know what, I'm not sure. And depending on the age, like if they're little, take a few minutes and wonder about it. Find out what the question really is. Sometimes they're asking that question and the question's not really the question. And so they're asking something and it's like, well, I wonder, well, what do you think? Well, I know this Bible story, so to start with kind of helping them to kind of think through, it's the scientific theory really, right? Going back, asking those questions. And then getting your Bibles out, I think, especially as they're getting a little bit older, showing your kids, like, this is where I'm going to go to find the answer first, is I'm going to look in God's word and I'm going to help you. And as kids get older in those elementary ages, I tell parents, like, pull out, like, look it up, like Google it. Some things we wonder and some things we Google is something we say often in the Wilson house. and so like, is this a wonder or is this a Google? And take some moments. Be careful with your Googling though, with theological issues, yes. Please. Please be careful with your Googling. Yes. But then take the time to think, okay, is there someone, even ask your kids, is there someone who you can think of who might be able to help us answer this? Or, I do have kids. I had a kid who came in one time with just a whole list of questions, all written on notebook paper. He had like worked so hard on this. And I'm like, all right, fire away. Yeah. And I told her, I may not know all the answers, but I'm willing to sit with you and try to figure this out. And sometimes I might say to you, I'm not sure that God has even revealed that to us yet. And that's okay too. Like, let's talk about holding things in tension and things like that. So I think just not being afraid of it, but knowing that you can seek out answers. Now, I have the benefit, you've had Clayton Keenan and Randy Isola on. So I quite frequently will send kids that way.
Yeah.
Or I'll have kids make videos for us. Sometimes we've had kids who've I'll be like, hey, to the parents, hey, can you record that on a video? And then between myself or Clayton or someone on the staff, we'll watch the video and record a video back to them and see, if that's helpful for them as well.
How do you, I think for us, going into it, our child was a pandemic baby. And also in the city of Chicago was much more shut down than a lot of other places. And so we didn't take Trey to church for the first 2 years of his life because the church we were attending also wasn't taking kids under 2. And I was like, well, I don't want to just sit in a giant room full of children and not be able to hear the sermon. So we watched church from home. And so when he first started coming to Christ Community, that was our first experience, dropping our son off at church. And thankfully we had the experience of, doing it at a daycare. So it was a similar, we're going to come back and get you. We're just gone for a little bit. These people are going to take care of you. But how do you talk to parents of younger children of this is not just daycare? This is not just drop your kids off so that you can go do something else. What would you say to parents to help them understand the importance of younger children being in church too?
Yeah. We have a full room. I always say there's a room of kids that are about 3 years old right now that we call them pandemic years old.
Yes.
We're not, they're just not, they think differently. It's actually fascinating. It is a fascinating, project in sociology or psychology or, for someone wiser than I. But, for our parents, there's proven studies done that say the most successful future adults are people who have 3 or more non-parent adults in their lives who are repeating the same things that are happening at home, that are repeating some of those positive messages, and specifically in this case, faith messages, right? So for a parent, I tell them, we have a built-in support system for you. We have a group that you want to add to your child's circle. You want to keep widening their circle as they get older so that they learn, who are the people that are trustworthy, who are the people that I can go to. And so to see your kids come into the nursery as even those little tiny, those infants, to watch the trust that happens when parents hand their children over the counter to us. We do not take that for granted. But then for our leaders to be able to hold them, our volunteers, to be able to pray over these little ones. I know when my son, the very first time I left my oldest son in the nursery, he was 5 weeks old. We went for it. I was a children's pastor. I had interviewed all these people and background checked them. So I was, I was good with it. And I handed him over the counter to a woman named Susan. Susan took him and she was just delighted. She was delighting in him. It was so fun to see someone else delight in my child the way that I was delighting in them. And so to let someone into that and to see the way that he ministered to her in that moment. Sometimes I like to just tell parents, I realize this is hard for you to leave your child with someone, but there is also beautiful benefit in this person who's been called to minister to children, and you are allowing them to live out what God has called them to do. And after I picked him up that day, that's what Susan said. She's I've had a hard relationship with my son lately, and to sit and to hold him and to pray for Jeremiah was just really, really special. She now, 22 years later, she actually messaged me the other day about just how much that had meant to her. And I was able to say, you're forever a part of his story because you were the first person to help him understand that he could trust people at church. And I want my kids to know that forever. And Jeremiah now at 22 years old, volunteers in his church at college, wants to go into elementary education because he volunteered at church as a young person. And so I think there is a lifetime of faith that starts in those moments of trust where a parent is ready to allow us to be a part of their circle.
Yeah, I think something that's impacted us as parents is we've had several weeks where we were sick, and then Eddie was on trips, and it was just I work at 4:00 in the morning, and so it was I'm not able to get out of the house without Eddie here to go to church, and then we were sick, and so we were gone for a month or something from church, and we came back, and Trey's teacher Neil, said, "We've missed you guys. Where have you been?" And Christ Community Church is a big church. There's like a billion children.
Multiple services.
Yes. And he knows, and he knew that we were gone for several weeks, and he noticed it right away and was like, hey, we've missed you. Where have you been? We're so excited to have you back. And even just as parents, how welcoming and supportive that feels of this person loves my child. It's a different person that loves my child and is excited to be with him and wants to be with him and teach him and to teach him about Jesus. And Teacher Neil is a name that comes up often in our house through the week.
I love that. Teacher Neil is fantastic.
Yeah, he's the best. We have to leave him this week, but that's okay. We'll be all right. I know. We'll be all right.
So while recording this episode, we received a live question, and that question was, Courtney, over your 11 years, are the questions changing, or are they relatively the same? Again, in your experience within the last 11 years.
Yeah. I would say the questions are changing. The ultimate answer and what they're looking for probably is not, if that makes sense. So I think the questions when they were, I've been in children's ministry now. I've been 11 years at Christ Community, but in children's ministry for over 20 years, probably my son's 22. So probably like 22 years in the church, 23 years in churches. And churches of various sizes and various types of communities. So anything from a small town to a larger, more metropolitan area, different parts of the country. And I would say like the questions, 20 years ago felt similar maybe in some ways. I think the more recent questions are very much more social issue related. We get lots of questions about things kids are learning about in school, things that they're experiencing in school, and a lot more in recent years, like anxiety. I have so many kids that are struggling with anxiety right now, probably post-pandemic. Lots of referrals to counselors and therapists. But I think, ultimately all of those questions, they're really looking for kind of that core of like, who is God and why would I want to follow him? I think that's become more apparent in recent years because I do think the social kind of issues of the day make kids think like, is this really something I want to follow as they start getting older? But it's really that reassurance of like, who is God and why would I want to follow him? Like, what would why is that even of benefit to me? And I think that's, again, I'm talking more kind of those questions that come in those elementary ages. When they were 20 years ago, the questions were probably a little more focused on a little more just kind of practical, like even more based in whatever we were learning about, those kinds of things. I think I see kids now asking questions that maybe are a little more related to their world and their lives, a little more related to, where is God in the midst of suffering and things like that, which you guys have addressed, but really like, why do I feel worried about things, or how can God help me in my worry? Or, when they're asking me things at school that I don't necessarily agree with, or I'm hearing different things at home. How do I respond to that? What does that look like? And what does this relationship with God have to offer me in those situations?
Without taking probably too much of a deep dive, like how, what do you think the impact of like culture and like social issues is having on our children nowadays, right? And in relation to, their relationship with Christ or them going to church, I guess generally speaking, like, right, like what, because again, like you said, like 20 years ago, like we weren't really in the midst of culture issues that like how we're now, or even like social issues, right? So like, what do you think generally is like, what kind of impact do you think that's having on the younger, on the younger generation?
Yeah, I think you have to remember 20 years ago, they weren't getting as much information either. So now you've got parents who are seeing it on, social media, online, watching YouTube videos. There have been some really like high impact elections and, political things that have happened, and kids were in their homes not able to go places, and hearing their parents like basically, say their opinions on things, watching different videos, all of these different things. And, anger feels active. And so at a time in our lives when things didn't feel very active, we had some people who were pretty active. And some of those things, I think, happened with little eyes watching them. And so I think a lot of those social issues is our kids are more aware because they have the ability to have more awareness. There's more information out there. There's more going on. They're hearing more of it. They're seeing their parents go to, school board meetings and speak out for or against things. And I think it is impacting their faith and the way they see the world. So it's happening in their homes. And then they're coming and saying, okay, church, like how do I process this? What does this look like?
Yeah, I think something several people have used in our conversations on this podcast is they say it's caught, not taught, which I had never heard until we started talking to these people, which I love. And I think our kids, catch our emotions. I mean, that's like very well researched, like if they fuel off of our emotions. But we were in a pandemic for 2-3 years where a lot of parents had a lot of anxiety, whether you were just having a child like we were, and we had a lot of anxiety just because it was like, I have a literal tiny baby and there's all these like germs everywhere. And like, it was before we really knew a lot about COVID. And so we were anxious about that. But then for like older kids too, who are really seeing their parents worry and anxiousness or frustration with family that dealt with it differently. And it's kind of like, no wonder they're coming out feeling anxious and more worried than generations before, because we all had like this collective, like big traumatic thing happen to us and had to deal with it in like our own different ways. So I take a lot of caution and like, okay, how am I interacting in this situation? And I'm being watched, like you said, like there's little eyes on us, and having to be aware of what am I doing and saying and how am I acting, and like regulating my own emotions first before I even try to start with him, which is really hard. But I have to be aware of like, what am I giving off that he could be catching from us? Yeah.
Yeah. On a lighter note, so I'm a big sports fan. I love baseball, so oftentimes I do watch baseball with Trey, and he wants to sit there and watch it with me. And when my team does great, I'm cheering, and he's like, again, it ties into like how kids are watching us and like watching like how we react to things and our emotions, and I make a gesture, I'm like, oh yeah, and then like sometimes throughout the day I hear him saying, oh yeah,
Or like, come on, man.
Oh yeah, like if our team's doing bad, I'm like, come on, man, really? And then sometimes I'll hear him in the other room, come on, man, really?
Yeah.
So all that to say, again, like the little eyes watching us thing is becoming a lot more real in our house as Trey's getting older.
Yeah.
What is your advice for parents who these cultural things are so new and they're not things that we've dealt with before, and they feel scared to like raise their children today? Like, what's your advice for a parent who's feeling anxious or scared to raise kids today?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Actually, there's just a lot of fear. And I would say, like, really, truly, like, lean into your church, lean into the people who want to love your kids to Jesus the same way you want that to happen. There are times when we just need other people around us, people to speak truth into our kids' lives, people to speak truth into our lives, to sit with a mom who's worried and fearful. I love doing that. I love to pray for somebody who feels that way. I want people to love being parents. I want people to find joy in that. And so lean into those people around you and let them help you find strength in that. Let them help you find some freedom from that too, from that fear, to just sit with people who can walk you through that and walk you into that. And we're willing as a church, I think I would speak for most children's pastors, to say, we get it. And we know that sometimes like it's scary to bring your kid to church. It's scary to have those moments. And we're willing to work with you on that because we want to see this for you. We want to live out our calling to make passionate disciples the same way we want you to live out that calling too. And so we will sit with you. We'll pray for you. We'll walk with you through those things.
We had a question come in for the parents of young children, toddlers, which I can greatly resonate with. If I didn't know I didn't write it, I would wonder if I wrote this. How do you get your children to listen to you? How do you get their attention? And, get them really to engage with what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's, there's two sides to that, right? There's like the discipline, like how do I get my child to listen to me?
Yeah.
There's like the, like, how do I get my child to listen to me? I was telling the story, my oldest, who again is the great experiment, right? So I talked about him more because your oldest is always your great experiment. But I thank him often for being the great experiment as a 22-year-old. Like, thank you for letting me learn with you. But there was one time when I was like, man, I'm going to be that parent. I'm going to speak like the blessings of the Lord over this child right now. And I took his little head in my hands and I'd, start telling him that, Jeremiah, you are so loved by God. And I'm telling him all of these things, like all the intensity in the world. And he's, patiently, quietly looking at me, little eyes, and I'm like, this is such a great moment. And he looks at me and he goes, Mommy. And I'm like, ooh, wait for it. It's coming back to me, right? And he's like, can I have a fruit snack now?
Oh, yes.
Yes, indeed you can. Actually, you can 100% have a fruit snack. And I'm not even going to be like, taste and see that the Lord is good, right? Like, I'm just going to be like, I'm going to give you the fruit snack and it's going to be fun. And so I think sometimes like we have to take that moment and be like, okay, is this the time that I need to have this conversation with them? And also kind of in that disciplinary way, like making sure that we're not using, any faith formation as any way to like bludgeon in our disciplining as well. Like just being careful that the ways that we talk about God and the times that we talk about him are ways that they're ready to listen. And also knowing that sometimes they may not listen, and that's okay. There's still words that are being spoken in your home. They're going to continue to hear those things being spoken or those songs being sung or whatever that is, that you're just going to continually talk about those things. And it is the surprise when your child then pops out with something that you're like, wait, I totally said that and I did not think you were listening. But obviously there was something there. I'm a firm believer that God sets eternity on the hearts of our kids, and that when they're ready, they will start responding to that, and especially the ways that we shepherd them towards it. So I think the listening thing, they are listening. I guarantee you they're listening. They may not be responding the way you want them to. But that's where, again, as a parent, you have to remove yourself and your own self-worth out of it and be able to say, like, that's okay. This is not about me. I'm doing everything I can and relying on the Holy Spirit as I point them towards Jesus. But they may not every time have, exactly that attention span that you're looking for.
Yeah, we're currently living with my parents, and they host a small group at their house every week. And just recently, Trey said to me, Gigi and Pops have their friends over and they talk about Jesus. And I was like, yeah, but like, how did you know that? Like, I've never said that to you before, but apparently, my parents have said that to him. And he gets it. And now he like talks about it often. He's like, oh, Gigi Pop's friends coming over. They talk about Jesus. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. And so they're listening, even if you think you're just like saying it in passing, or you're just saying it to like frame what's happening with your day. Like, I just want you to know Gigi Pop's friends are coming over and they're going to talk about Jesus. He's like, oh, and he remembers it later and is telling it back to me 100 times. But yeah, they do listen, even if they ask for fruit snacks or popsicles afterwards.
Yes.
Or tell you about like an ant on the ground or whatever.
Yes.
Courtney, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing with us. And a personal thank you from Eddie and I for your ministry with even our son and the children at Christ Community Church. We've been truly blessed to have this be our first church where Trey is going to church with us and experience that and be so welcomed and so loved and be so happy to go to church. He talks about it throughout the week and asks, when are we going to church? So Thank you for your ministry and for all that you've done to develop your leaders and your volunteers. It is impactful. So I hope you know that and hear that. And we're grateful parents that are part of your ministry. We usually like to end with a benediction, so Eddie will lead that for us.
Yeah, so if you just join us in that. To him who is able to do far more than we can understand, may he give us the wisdom to raise our children to first love God above all else and love others as themselves. Go in peace.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Car Seat Questions podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and just let us know what you thought.
Be sure to follow us on YouTube, wherever you find your podcasts, Instagram, TikTok, basically anywhere, and drop your comments below about what you thought about the episode. Bye.
Double wave.
Oh my gosh.